one point I think that was really interesting that she mentioned is that across the board of all religions, there has been this sort of cultural discrimination against women, and it's not peculiarly to Islam, but it's just that right now with the Western countries moving forward towards secularization, so they don't have that much room to use religion as a basis for discriminating against women. Now, in terms of Malaysia itself and having still hudud laws that are, in her words, discriminatory against Muslims. I have read recently of Muhammad Hashim Kumali's article when I was in SOAS, School of African Studies in London, that it is interesting to know that he said it is not really about hudud laws itself, but the various interpretations of how to implement these hudud laws. Because if it was up to certain ulamas and certain religious leaders, if they thought that it was appropriate, they can actually include certain situations where women testimonies are allowed. Now, maybe I would like to ask Dr. Mazli to comment on what is the differences between the text itself, because Zainah Anwar has already clearly stated that Islam should not be discriminatory against women. It is all about justice. But why is there still these discrepancies between the law itself and the implementation? So I would like to invite Dr. Mazli to please elaborate.
Thank you for the time, and good morning. Assalamualaikum. And again, like Zainah, I would like to thank you all for inviting me to speak and share some views this morning with you all, a group of young people, Malaysian, multiracial, multi-religious, and it is something which is very nice to see, and I hope this will go well for the future of our country. Right, before answering that question, I think I must also, I would like to set the parameters of my ideas, mainly because I'm not an expert in all religions. I'm just an observer. I'm not a very active advocate like my colleague here. And what I'm going to say is basically my observations as well as my views, personal views as a Muslim. And I don't really pretend that I'm speaking for the voice of Muslim women. Right, and also with regards to parameters, yes, the topic is very broad, gender, Malaysian context, religion. But it is rather too broad, but I will just focus on things that are highlighted in the media that people talk about a lot. And this happens to be Muslim, Islam, women, Sharia, blah blah blah. We all have heard time and time again how Islam is incompatible with modernity, if modernity equates westernization, how Islam discriminates against women, how Islam oppresses women, as well as not giving them the due place, which I do recognize some of the limitations and weaknesses of the system that have limited the role of women in Muslim societies. I hope you all can fill in, those who are not Muslims, your point of view with regards to gender issues in your own religion. But Islam itself, as a religion that recognizes gender distinction, in some areas of its teaching, it emphasizes this distinction, and therefore it is certainly a topic that merits question. It is certainly a topic that will undoubtedly attract a lot of attention, studies, criticisms, because the way that this has evolved in our society is such that many of these are seen as being discriminatory against women. So these kind of things like the role of Muslim women in Islam, the Sharia, these two are topics that are always presented as things that make Islam different from the West, from the rest of the modern world, which is to a certain degree true, and which is to a certain degree that's something that is perhaps is not going to be changeable as long as Muslims stick to what we like to term as mainstream ideas, mainstream teachings of Islam. Right. So I will now begin to go to what Zainah Anwar was mentioning just now. Right. It has to be understood that because of the many non-Muslims present here, I must say very briefly that in a way Islam is a bit different from the other religions because it has what we call the Shariat. apart from the doctrine, which is the oneness of God, which is that there is not a God but God. The other aspect of Islam, which when we embrace it, is to accept the second component of Islam, which is to accept that Muhammad was the last prophet. And that means that with the doctrine, it comes methods. And the methods to understand the doctrine is through the Sharia, which is what the Prophet taught with regards to how to worship, how to live, and how to behave. And this covers things like sexuality, things like family, morality, and so on. And again, this is something that will always be seen as something very difficult for Muslims to integrate with the rest of the modern world because of this some fixed, unchanging nature of what Islam regards as what is correct morality, what Islam regards as correct practice. Yes, I do agree with my colleague Zainah that patriarchy is a problem, has been a problem for many centuries, especially in the subcontinent, in Africa, in the Middle East, and also to a certain degree in our country. That we cannot run away. But what is important is how we deal with it. And like it or not, unfortunately, if you want to move to complete secularization of Muslim community where there is no distinction at all with regards to gender, where everything is very, very equal, that is going to be very difficult because a lot of people who are in this room, who are very well educated, very intelligent, who still like to accept that there is some distinction in some areas, not all, some areas of the teachings of Islam, and that is going to pose a very difficult challenge to say that let's erase all this, let's get rid of all this, and go for all-out equality in the very secular concept, very secular notion of what is regarded as equality, what is regarded as justice, and what is regarded as non-discriminatory. Right, where do we get this kind of ordinary Muslim like me and others, where do we get this idea that what is acceptable and what is not? With regards to the practice of Muslim, here I bring again that because the corpus of teaching is huge, is vast, we rely on scholars who are experts. And I do accept that specialization is something which is important in any civilization. All civilization regards specialization as essential to move forward. And with Islam itself, this comes to how the knowledge of Islam should be interpreted into practice, and that is how mainstream Muslims accept the authority of scholars. Yes, there will be problems with this because if society is very, very ignorant, is accepting the tyranny of the scholars without questioning, yes, it's going to be a problem. But by and large, with education, we begin to understand our limits. I think we know our ignorance must become a bit more educated, and that is how ordinary Muslims perceive where the teachings of Islam come from, what is considered as obligatory, what is considered as the norms, and what is not. Of course, whether one chooses to practice to put this into practice is something else, but what is accepted as norms is something else, and that comes with the authority of the scholars. And there's a very long history of the development of the authority or the legitimacy of the views of the scholars, and this is not out of patriarchy, and this is not out of suppression of people who should not be there, but this is out of the true character of good scholars, and this is accepted by the mainstream world. And it's very difficult to say that if you think that we think that they are not capable, that they don't have the legitimacy, then we have to come up with something else, something that will be acceptable by the mainstream Muslims. So that is the problem, that yes, there is some aspects of patriarchy there, but I think by and large, men or women in Islam have accepted the authority of this of the scholars based on their character, based on their knowledge, and this comes out as a consensus, a medieval consensus we call it, because the era was the medieval era, but that era was the era of scholarship, whereas now it's not the era of scholarship. So yes, I agree, we need to move forward. Some of these are really keeping us backwards, but by and large, we do accept the authority of the old scholars based on that basis. I would not like really to deal too much about the laws and the fine details of individual rules, because